All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're unpacking a really provocative theory from our source material. The core idea? That the biggest wars of our time aren't being fought with soldiers and tanks, but with, well, with ideas. It's a whole new take on what modern conflict actually looks like.
So, let me ask you, when you hear the word war, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's probably images of tanks, soldiers, a classic battlefield. Well, the source material we're digging into today says, hold on, let's just set that image aside for a minute, because it argues the real war, the one that really matters, isn't happening on some physical front line at all. It's happening somewhere else entirely.
And this quote right here, this is really the heart of the argument. Think about it. The source is saying that traditional boots-on-the-ground warfare is just a terrible business decision. It's a net loss for everyone involved. The real fight, the one that actually determines winners and losers, is economic. And maybe even deeper than that, it's philosophical. It's a battle for who controls the money, and just as importantly, who controls the narrative.
So, to put a name to this new kind of conflict, the source material introduces a pretty stark term for the grand strategy it claims is at play, the Minimisation Plan. And what is that exactly? Well, it's described as this big, coordinated strategy to basically hollow out Western democracies from the inside. Okay, so here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with what this new type of war even is. Then we'll look at the battlefield and who the key players are. After that, we'll get into the specific rules of engagement, the tactics being used, we'll see how the strategy looks in action with some real-world examples, and finally, we'll talk about the ultimate objective of all this.
All right, first up, a new form of war. And this is a battle for hearts, minds, and the very idea of truth itself. You see, the really crucial thing to understand is that the goal here isn't what you'd expect. We're not talking about conquering territory. According to this framework, the real aim is to make the whole idea of democracy seem, totally broken, to make it look chaotic, corrupt, and just plain unworkable.
The name the source gives this is Axiomatic Warfare. And honestly, it's a pretty wild and frankly chilling concept. The idea is that the weapons in this war aren't bombs and bullets anymore. The weapon is philosophy itself. The goal is to just pump out so many confusing, conflicting narratives that people can't tell what's real anymore. The whole idea is to make fact and fiction just dissolve into one another.
Okay, Section 2, the battlefield and factions. Let's get into who the key players are here. And what's interesting is that this analysis says, forget left versus right. It throws out that simple political model. Instead, it breaks society down into three groups, defined by what they do, whether they're trying to build things up or tear them down.
First, you've got the Maximisers. You can think of them as the builders, right? The problem solvers, the innovators. According to this framework, these are the people working to create a better, more cooperative society where everyone has more opportunity.
And then on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, you have the Minimisers. The source paints them as the ones actively waging this new kind of war. Their mission isn't to build anything at all. It's to deconstruct, to tear things down, by creating division and making everyone cynical. And why? To achieve their own, shall we say, extractive goals.
Now, who's caught in the middle of this tug of war? Well, that would be the vast majority of us, which the source calls the compliant. The theory goes that this group, the mainstream, isn't really driven by deep ideology or logic. It's more about emotion, social cues, and identity, and that makes them the main prize. They are the battlefield, and getting them on your side is how you win this war.
So let's put this side by side, because the contrast is pretty stark, right? On one hand, you've got the Maximisers. Their goal? The greater good. How do they do it? By building and cooperating. The outcome? Expanding choices for people. Then you have the Minimisers. Their goal? The greater lie. Their method? Divide and extract. The outcome? Well, achieving their own extractive ends. It's really a simple battle of creation versus deconstruction.
All right, on to part 3, the rules of engagement. This is where we get into the nitty-gritty tactics of the so-called narrative warfare. So how exactly do the Minimisers try to win over the compliant? Well, the source material points to two main tactics that are supposedly right at the center of their playbook.
First up, there's a tactic called manufacturing justification, and it's actually pretty straightforward, kind of like a two-step recipe. Step 1, you create a crisis, or you just take a real one and blow it way out of proportion. Step 2, you point to that crisis you just hyped up and say, see, democracy is broken, but don't worry, we have the solution. And that solution is usually, well, a lot more authoritarian.
Okay, but then there's a much sneakier tactic, and it's called controlled demolition. This one is pretty wild. The idea is that you introduce a policy that looks good on the surface, something a maximizer would propose, but secretly it's been designed to fail, and to fail in a really spectacular, public, and divisive way. The source actually points to the 2023 Australian voice referendum as a prime example of this, arguing it was set up to spark a huge, painful debate that would just burn everyone out and leave them feeling cynical about change.
Moving on to Section 4, the strategy in action. Because, this can't just be a theory, right? We need to see how it applies to real-world events. And that's exactly what the source does. It uses this framework as a lens to look at some major global policies.
So let's take a look at the AUKUS Security Pact. And the first thing you see is just this massive number, up to $368 billion. That's a staggering amount of money. Now, if you look at this through the lens of the Minimisation Plan, that huge cost, well, it isn't a bug, it's a feature. The source argues the price tag is the weapon. The goal isn't just to get submarines, it's to trigger something called strategic exhaustion. Basically, you lock a country into a crippling financial burden for generations, you shatter its other alliances, and you make it completely dependent on another power.
And this table here really shows the analytical model in action. The source calls it psychic hegemony. It's basically a decoder ring for policy. You look at the bait, that's the nice-sounding public reason for something. Then you look past that to find the alleged true intent. And you can see how it applies this model not just to AUKUS, but also to the voice referendum and something called the Doge Initiative, arguing that each one has a secret disruptive mission.
Okay, final section, the ultimate objective. This is the big one. If everything we've talked about is part of a real coordinated strategy, then where's it all going? What is the end game of this so-called minimization plan?
Well, according to the source, the single thread connecting all these different actions is systemic disruption. The ultimate goal isn't just to beat one country in a war. No, it's much bigger than that. The idea is to systematically take apart the entire global order that's been in place since the end of the Cold War, the one led by the US and its allies. So, what would they replace it with? The desired end state is what's called a multipolar world. But according to this analysis, that doesn't mean a world of balanced equal partners. It means creating a new global system where authoritarian powers, specifically the Sino-Russian axis, can pretty much do what they want without being constrained by the current Western-led rules.
So, at the end of the day, what are we left with here? The source material gives us this massive, all-encompassing, and let's be honest, pretty challenging framework. Is it just a giant theory of everything, maybe bordering on conspiracy? Or is it a genuinely useful new way to look at the world, a new lens to help us make sense of the really complex and confusing things happening around us? That's the big question we're left to chew on.